January 13th, and we are at Lunenburg Town Hall. This is a meeting of the Lunenburg Finance Committee. I have a preamble to read, and then we'll get started. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is also provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the Zoom application or from a telephone, dial 888-475-4499 and enter webinar ID 792-737-0353. If you have not registered with Zoom, you'll be asked for your name and an email address. No participant ID is needed. Just press pound when asked. Telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting, and computer app users may use the raised hand feature to request to speak. Please note that the available Zoom option, broadcast, and recordings are for the convenience of the public. If any technical difficulties were to occur,
sorry about that.
No worries. The meeting will continue. If you wish to continue to participate, you must report to the location on this notice. We are again at Lunenburg Town Hall. Please be aware of this and plan accordingly. Please also note that the wearing of face masks is currently required of all persons entering town buildings in Lunenburg. The agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I am in the process of admitting Dave Passios, who is a member of the Finance Committee. I'm assuming Dave will be participating remotely this evening. And I am also expecting Jay Simeone to join remotely, although he has not as of yet. And Tom Gray I have not heard from, so he may be arriving late. Are there any announcements? I only have one announcement, which I forwarded to the members of this committee. The MMA meeting, which interestingly we were just chatting about earlier, about MMA meetings, that was scheduled for next weekend on Friday and Saturday. It was originally scheduled to happen in person at the Heinz Convention Center in Boston. It is now remote. That's the bad news. The good news is that it is now remote, which means it's easier to participate in, and there is no fee to participate. And my understanding, it is not too late to register. So if any members of the committee are interested, please follow the link that I've emailed to you and participate. Any other announcements? Hearing none. Is there any public comment? Members of the public who wish to comment, please signify by raising your hand. I see Mrs. Archambault waving her hand. Oh, no, I see it's raised as well. So welcome, Mrs. Archambault. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. My name's Carol Archambault, 662 Page Street, and I am the current chairperson of the school committee. I'd like to thank the Finance Committee for inviting our local legislators, Senator Cronin, Representative Saina, and Kushmerek, to the meeting this evening to discuss the impact of many state policies, mandates, and projects that affect our local budget. The Student Opportunity Act, while clearly in the best interest of low-income and urban areas, has created funding challenges for many small suburban and rural communities like Lunenburg by limiting the growth of Chapter 70 funds. Working together to meet these challenges will provide the best path forward for all our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Archambault. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment? Seeing and hearing none, are there any members of the committee that wish to make a public comment? I do have a comment. I am beginning to be concerned about the capital plan. Just as a matter of history, the capital plan process, we have a capital plan committee that includes a member at large and appointed members of a variety of committees, including this committee. And it's a process that starts really in the fall and continues till right about now. A list of requested capital items is presented to the town. They're prioritized by members of the capital planning committee. And then traditionally, historically, what's happened is that we have a formula that drives what we spend on capital, and we draw the line based on that prioritization list. And over the course of the last couple of years, that criteria and scoring has been updated. It's been quite transparent, and I think it's been very well run. And I've been a supporter of that, and I've been very hesitant to recommend any changes to capital planning because I think it's served us well. Last year, we spent more funds, more available funds on capital than we've ever spent in our history. And this year, we will spend more than we did last year. I don't anticipate that that'll be a trend throughout the decade. These are the results of COVID and unspent funds at the end of each year. Last year, we funded no projects in the school department whatsoever. And this year, the school department projects, I believe, are prioritized 12, 14, and 27. I may be off a digit on each of those. Another issue with this is that the recent meetings have not been televised or recorded, and the minutes have yet to be published, and the documentation is not readily available. Our school department accounts for probably half of the capital investment existing in the town of Lunenburg today. I haven't seen a up-to-date accounting. We do it regularly, but it's a big number. And I'm just concerned that there may be a systemic issue here. I don't know what the issue is, quite frankly. I've made inquiries. I've talked to Mr. Passios, our representative. I've talked to the administration of the school department. I haven't gotten an answer that satisfies me yet, but I'm just raising the issue now. We will hear about the capital plan in the coming weeks, but I want to make everybody aware that I have a very serious concern about what we're doing with capital planning right now. With that, are there any other public comments? Okay. Without further ado, next item on the agenda is the town manager's update on the legislative budget priority requests. Apropos, because in the room are our three legislators representing Lunenburg. Mrs. Lemieux.
Thank you for coming today. Yep. So this is to the benefit of the committee and to the legislators, because they're going to hear this for the first time tonight as well. And this hasn't been finalized. We initially discussed this, the Board of Selectmen and I, at the January 4th meeting. So we reviewed the projects that were submitted last year. There were 4. $127,000 for the fire alarm upgrade at the Lunenburg Primary School, $355,000 for the hazardous materials abatement at the old primary school, $180,000 for firefighter turnout gear for firefighters, and $40,000 for the installation of new LED lighting fixtures at the library. Since that list was submitted last year, we received a $25,000 earmark from the state, and the balance of that, the fire alarm upgrade, was appropriation through the school department. So that project has been, or should have been complete. It was supposed to be set to be complete during the, when they were closed for school during the December break. The town also received a $40,000 earmark from the state for the installation of the LED lighting at the library. That was item number 4. And the capital plan for fiscal '22 funded $100,000 for firefighter turnout gear. And the current funding in the annual budget, the fire chief doesn't see a need for earmark requests for this. So the projects that I proposed to the select board were projects that haven't been funded as part of the bond bills. That included the projects of Chapter 228 of the Acts of 2018, which included $300,000 for the redevelopment of the property at 925 Mass Ave, which is the old gas station, $250,000 for the upstart cost of a community commercial kitchen for small business owners that need commercial kitchen space, and $450,000 for facade and streetscape improvements in the downtown area. $371,000 for hazardous materials abatement at the old primary school. This is updated costs, and that is also in the fiscal '23 capital plan project request. $330,000 for the Flat Hill Road culvert. We currently have $428,500 that was approved through the fiscal '22 capital plan, but due through projected construction costs, we would be short approximately $330,000. And $100,000 for the senior center building improvements. These are a couple combined capital requests in the fiscal '23 capital plan. The board prioritized, and as has been historically done, we submit 4 projects from top priority to lowest priority. And so they prioritized those out of that list with the Flat Hill Road culvert as number 1 for $330,000. $371,000 for the hazardous materials abatement. The old primary school is number 2. Number 3 being $300,000 for the redevelopment of the property at 925 Mass Ave. And $100,000 for the senior center building improvements. As part of that discussion at the select board's meeting, they also asked to inquire if the Parks Commission had any projects for fiscal '23 where they had the cost of those projects identified. I have reached out to the chair of the committee. They have a meeting scheduled for next week, so that will be a discussion item. Not sure if they would have projected costs at this time for any projects. So what I did suggest today was just give me a timeline of when they would have those projected costs, and possibly, because we're going to be discussing ARPA funding, local ARPA funding too. So if we have that timeline and those projected costs, when we can have them, they could be possible considerations for ARPA projects.
It occurred to me, at least from the ARPA perspective, we're very limited there, but one of the things that may fall in because of water and sewer, maybe the ability to do something around those bathrooms
Well,
with ARPA funds, or at least tying it into sewer, or...
We will hear more, because we're going to be working with a consultant. It's called Capital Strategic Solutions. They're going to be coming to the February 1st Select Boards meeting, which I want to invite the Finance Committee to as well. We'll do a presentation of an overview of ARPA funding, but they just issued the final rule from the U.S. Treasury, and as I understand it, they determined lost revenue that we could utilize up to 10 million, which we only have 3.57 million. So we could use up to that amount on lost revenue, which basically opens up our opportunities a lot broader than previously.
So we can call it lost revenue, even though it really isn't lost revenue? All right.
That's how I understand, but we'll be discussing that.
Well, that's good.
So
that obviates at least one paragraph in the statement that I'm about to read, so that's great. Okay, any questions of the town manager relating to legislative priorities?
Just one. For the Parks Commission, is that primarily geared towards Marshall Park, or is this sort of, are you looking to more broadly than
broadly.
that? Okay, you're not kind of honing in specifically on the Marshall Park plan? Okay.
I have a question. What was the 300 for? 300K something?
That was for the 925 Mass Ave, which is the old gas station.
A follow-up on that, do we own that property now?
No, we do not.
Okay.
We do not. That's an ongoing goal of mine, and I've been working with the EPA and a consultant on possible funding, and I just learned that due to the infrastructure bill passed on the federal level, that there's going to be a lot of funding for a project like that. So I'll have more on that next week, hopefully, because I have a meeting with them.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the conversation with our legislators. So as I think everyone on this meeting should be aware at this point, we've invited our legislative delegation, Senator Cronin, Representative Kushmarek, and Representative Sina this evening to talk about a number of issues that have come across and been discussed at this committee over the course of the last several months. I've shared some preparatory documents with the delegation. First of all, thank you all very much for coming. I'll thank you again in a moment, but I want to emphasize, I know your time is very valuable, and we appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us this evening. I prepared a sort of an intro document for the delegation that I shared with the members of this committee prior to the meeting. I think for the benefit of everybody watching at home, I'm going to read most of this document just to kind of set the stage of the topics that I think are relevant to be discussed this evening. I don't want to limit it to these topics. I'm then going to ask each of the members of the legislature to come forth and comment as they see fit, and then I'll open it up to conversation and questions from the board. So without further ado, I'll read the letter that I shared a couple of days ago. Dear Senator Cronin, Representative Kushmarek, and Representative Sina, thank you for attending the Lunenburg Finance Committee meeting this week. Attached is our meeting agenda and some additional introductory issues. Obviously, this meeting is really to discuss financial issues that will affect our budget and our financial well-being in the coming years. Obviously, your take on the upcoming budget year, the state's budget effects on municipal aid, and its ability to support some of the earmark priorities that the town manager has outlined prior to this discussion are all critical success factors for Lunenburg. Chief among these concerns is Chapter 70, which was the principal focus of the meeting that you were unable to attend in October. I've shared the recording of that meeting and have again attached the presentation from Mrs. Novak from the MASC. And as we've discussed previously, while the Student Opportunity Act was widely supported by committees in Lunenburg at the time as the right thing to do for education in Massachusetts, the expectation was that this rising tide would lift all ships. However, in the years since, that has not been our experience in Lunenburg. The formulas are extremely complex and difficult to understand, but in the final analysis, Lunenburg does not meet, nor likely will we meet in the near future, thresholds for special education, English learners, or low-income students that will put us in a position to meaningfully gain from the massive infusion of money funneling into education in Massachusetts. Instead, we find ourselves in the hold harmless category, gaining roughly $30 additional per student annually, seemingly in perpetuity. These increases of Chapter 70 funding of well under 1% put a substantially greater burden on local contributions in order to meet increasing costs for insurance, collective bargaining, Medicare contributions, etc. Our school budgets, while barely meeting the needs assessment of our administration, have averaged increases of 2.5% to 3.5% over the past few years. As you're aware, Proposition 2.5 did not change when the legislature and DESE retooled Chapter 70 formulas. Our current outlook is not sustainable. A potential short-term fix may be to simply amend the hold harmless increases to a much more meaningful amount as the legislature continues to add funding to Chapter 70 as prescribed by the Student Opportunity Act. With respect to some of the other topics on the agenda, We'd like to hear your thoughts or ideas with respect to ARPA spending. We just talked a little bit about that. We have been, until now, quite limited in where we're able to spend ARPA funds, and my concern has been that with every municipality in the country looking to spend money in very narrow areas like broadband or water or sewer, we may find ourselves way at the back of the list in terms of partnering with private industry to do these projects by the end of 2024. And I'm curious as to what you might be able to do to help us, either working through state contracts or what have you. With respect to the Police Reform Act, our concerns relate to our reliance on reserve officers in Lunenburg, which make up both an important part of our police department and they contribute substantially to our town's culture. New training and certification requirements may preclude our ability to keep or retain reserve officers, may put us at a massive financial burden to try to train these officers up to standard, or may require us to substantially increase our full-time police force to make up for the current contributions that our reserve officers who we may be unable to retain because they're unable to meet those training requirements. Currently, the Police Reform Act, again, initially supported by many of us, myself included, effectively amounts to a massive unfunded mandate that we need your help with. We would like to see if there's an appetite to lessen the reporting requirements on municipal governments and school districts. Lunenburg recently had to add to our town and school administrative staffs, largely to accommodate steadily increasing reporting requirements. Similarly, our requirements to retain official documents is exceedingly burdensome. Why can't we digitize our documents? The town meeting articles for renovation and replacement of TC Passios that recently failed included thousands of square feet for document storage, which in 2022 seems to us as vastly outdated. Finally, as you are aware, Lunenburg is struggling with determining the future path of some important town buildings. Our select board has recently renewed their charge to our municipal building committee, and we've seen over the last few years tens of millions of dollars poured into historical buildings in neighboring communities, notably Fitchburg City Hall. We'd invite your partnership to find out how we may secure Lunenburg's fair share for Lunenburg Town Hall, the Ritter Building, the site of the old primary school at 30 School Street, and the TC Passios building. And again, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I look forward to the discussion and our continued partnership. And with that, I'd like to invite Senator Cronin, if you're ready to comment.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you all tonight. Covered a lot of ground in that statement, and I think we're not going to solve any problems or issues here tonight, but I think I appreciate this conversation, and I know my colleagues in the legislature who are here tonight, Representative Kushmarek and Representative Sina, appreciate the opportunity to have this dialogue and continue this dialogue beyond tonight on a number of important issues. I think Chapter 70, and there goes my mask, Chapter 70 is tough. I think if you go 2 miles down two-way, you're going to find a community with low-income students, English language learners, and Chapter 70 levels that are truly game-changing to the tune of millions of dollars every fiscal year. And I agree with you. Lunenburg is really caught in a middle ground. I know I was able to watch the presentation from Ms. Novick. You know, we are a 60% contribution community here in Lunenburg, and I think that really puts us in a tough ground. And I think one thing that we should talk about, and I hope we can work together on, is how do we allow Lunenburg and set the conditions for Lunenburg to grow its base budget if enrollment isn't growing, right? And I think one area to look at that is per pupil reimbursement. And I think especially for a community like Lunenburg, that's something that we should talk about and we can advocate for in the legislature. In terms of ARPA spending, I know the town is going to have a lot of flexibility in that $3.57 million. And I think, you said 2024. I know at the state legislature, we have until 2024 to allocate the funds that we received. My understanding is from the American Rescue Plan that those funds do not need to be spent until 2026. So we have a little bit longer of a glide path to put those funds to work. And the town is going to have a lot of flexibility. I know there is a committee in Fitchburg that obviously it's a gateway city. They received over $30 million in direct federal aid from the ARPA package. They have a committee that is making recommendations to the mayor for how to use that. I think the finance committee should have a role in making recommendations to the Board of Selectmen, but across the things that I know are important in town, historic buildings, our parks, Marshall Park, the skate park. There are opportunities and there's flexibility there to put money towards those goals. The Police Reform Act, I know, I think my colleague, Representative Kushmerek, has had a conversation recently with Chief Gamble. I think all of us want to support the town however we can and want to make sure that we are not encumbering this community with unfunded mandates. I don't think Mr. Beardmore did a great job in explaining what the impact is on a small town force like ours. But what the Police Reform Act did is it asks or it requires that reserve officers get, I believe it's 800 hours of training. And I think that's good, right? That's good for the town. That's good for our police force. We want a well-trained force and reserve force. But we've got to pay, these reserve officers to be trained. I know Representative Kushmerek will jump more into the figures, but I think that is one area that I speak for myself and myself alone, but I am happy to advocate at the state level to make sure that the mandates that are coming down from the state legislature are funded by the state. In terms of digitizing our documents, I am not an expert in municipal storage or record keeping. That's a conversation I'm happy to have with either Heather or Kathy Herrick. And obviously, anytime we can streamline or make government more efficient and our record keeping more efficient, we are happy to work together with the town on that. And in terms of the town buildings, the town really has a responsibility, in my view, to figure out what they want to go and what direction they want to go with a number of these buildings. And now this is, whether it's a primary school or the old Pastios building, which direction the town goes. I believe I speak for the entire legislative delegation. We will be there to support the town, but it's not for us to come up with. And that is not a debate that I plan to wade into. But on the other end of it, whether it's housing and historic tax credits or asbestos relief like we did for the old primary school, we are willing to work with the town and ready to work with the town to make sure that we are partnering to move those projects forward. And with that, I'd open it up to any questions or invite Representative Kushmerek to follow me, and then we can open up for kind of wide discussion at the end.
I'd like to do that.
Great.
Mr. Chairman and honorable members, thank you for giving this opportunity to pursue this dialogue around funding challenges across the municipality, but also just the opportunity to speak candidly about some of the financial challenges and long-term capital requirements that are coming down the pike. I think Chapter 70, Chairman Beardmore, you said it really well earlier of it was expected to be this rising tide that would benefit every community. And I think in some ways it may have been sold as, benefiting all communities equally, but certainly I think it fell short in that charge in some ways of, at the heart of the Student Opportunity Act, what it really did was look to reappropriate funding from, more affluent suburban communities, maybe your Westons, your your Cambridges, your Newtons, Watertowns, and reappropriate those dollars more to gateway communities and more urban environments across the Commonwealth. And I think what really, the school districts that really got, in some ways, left out were more the rural suburban communities, Lunenburg among them. And I know there's been a number of discussions across. There's a rural caucus within the Massachusetts legislature, primarily many of the truly western Massachusetts municipalities, but also a number of central Massachusetts communities that also fit that profile of rural. And they've been talking, and certainly the Student Opportunity Act occurred before I took office and before I joined the legislature, so I don't know if this was done by design or if it was an unintended consequence in the hope of really trying to focus on the largest achievement gaps across the Commonwealth, which are certainly happening in those more populated and urban environments. I think the conversations I have with the superintendent in Fitchburg are still very much the same, though. Even with an infusion of more than $5 million of new Chapter 70 funds, they'll tell you it's not enough to close the achievement gaps that they identify, and there are still financial shortfalls that prevent them from really meeting the challenges and raising the bar from where they were just a few years ago. And I think what we're seeing right now, particularly in light of COVID, are the enrollment struggles. I know there's a fairly proportional enrollment decline in Lunenburg as across many of our peer communities. It's almost identical to the enrollment decline that Fitchburg is experiencing, and both communities are slightly higher than what is being experienced in Leominster, though still fairly comparable. And what we're seeing is, a financial deficit because of those enrollment declines. And I know across this region, and much of our delegation really sought to advocate for an investment through both the budget process and through ARPA for the trust fund for the Student Opportunity Act. And that was really to help with some dollars to aid for the hold harmless municipalities, Fitchburg, Lunenburg, Leominster among them, as well as if for some reason the enrollment decline self-corrected over the next couple of years, that they could be applied to as almost the down payment for Student Opportunity Act in fiscal year 23, 24, 25, 26, et cetera. So while there was funding placed in this trust, it just, quite frankly, didn't go far enough. I think the enrollment declines were far more widespread than the administration anticipated, and even more so than I think the legislative leadership's earliest anticipation of enrollment. So certainly we'll be working across our delegation, the North Central Massachusetts delegation, the 9 of us legislators, senators, and representatives, trying to work together to continue to advocate for this hold harmless and some kind of stopgap funding for those school districts that meet that qualification. But again, every dollar that gets put in there is, quite frankly, never enough. And so I know every school district is saying the same of, I think it's a 59 student decline year over year, or from 2019 to 2021 for Lunenburg. If I'm correct, it's something like 159 in Fitchburg, 3 times the number, and Leominster's kind of in the low hundreds as well. I believe around 120. I know this because my legislative aide, Brandon Robbins, behind me, is a school committee member in Leominster, so we often compare those numbers to get a sense of what are we experiencing throughout the North Central region, particularly right here in our own backyard. So I know there's certainly discussions happening within the rural caucus just around some of the deficiencies or potentially unintended consequences of the Student Opportunity Act. Mr. Rogers, Dave Rogers, I know, made a comment at the October meeting about, really the density of the Boston and the greater Boston delegation kind of exerting its will, on the rest of the Commonwealth. And while I think there's certainly, he's absolutely right. That's traditionally been the case, and it continues to be the case. In some ways, I think in some cases it was trying to address, the largest deficiencies in education education spending across the Commonwealth. And I think now it's the opportunity for, can we find enough, the smaller urban communities and the large urban communities were largely addressed through the Student Opportunity Act, and is there enough rural communities and rural suburban communities to really be able to make some noise? And I think that's the partnership. You had one really important organization here in October, the Mass Association of School Committees. Another association is Mass Municipal Association that you mentioned earlier. And I'd say the third maybe cog in that wheel would be the Mass Association of School Superintendents. And I think those are really, and coupled with the Mass Teachers Association, I would say those are kind of the four largest advocacy organizations that really look to drive a legislative change from outside of Beacon Hill. And I'd say conversations with each of those organizations, and maybe between your superintendent and the Mass Association of Superintendents would be critical too, in figuring out how many other school districts are experiencing something similar, and there's strength in numbers. Exactly as Mr. Rogers was saying, remotely in that October meeting of, can you find enough allies from peer and like-minded communities who are in a similar situation, and as they work, and through these groups as they work on some solutions, that's where we can stand ready to try to partner with those organizations and see what we can do to help address some of the long-term ramifications of the Student Opportunity Act. Again, a wonderful piece of legislation that helps millions of kids today and in the future, but sometimes it's the broad brush and not the fine lines that get done on these sweeping pieces of legislation. With regards to the ARPA, I think Senator Cronin stated it correctly. 2024 is really dividing or making the decisions for where and how the funding should be allocated, and the spending should be done by the end of 2026, fiscal year 26. So I think you do have some time there, and really, initially there were strict guidelines around how and where, and I think you outlined in your email pretty concisely, direct COVID-related expenses, water, wastewater, broadband. Since that time, it has not only gone to lost revenue from municipalities, but it really has taken these broad definitions. And in some cases, other municipalities have been able to replace, spend existing tax revenue in one area on a project that might not meet the qualifications, and then redirect that ARPA funding to COVID-related expenses that are already in your budget in areas that were impacted, that are already part of a typical budget year. So I would argue that there are really loose guidelines at this point. I think it's hard-pressed to find projects that can't in some way fit underneath the broad umbrella that is the ARPA funding. So I know even among those legislative priorities that we heard about earlier, the culvert program, the legislature did allocate a large chunk of funding to address culverts and water, wastewater infrastructure as part of the state's ARPA allocation. So if there isn't funding that comes from there, it might be in the form of, kind of micro municipal grants there, that may also qualify for your local ARPA funding as well. So I'd encourage you to look at that. And I know that there's some state procurement officers throughout our region that are also kind of looking at trying to essentially aggregate some of their success here of how broadly can they use these funds, and where is it appropriate, and what challenges and roadblocks are they having. So I know the State Procurement Officers Association, which is almost always led by a North Central Massachusetts procurement officer. Usually Gardner and Fitchburg are the two, but I know Leominster has been pretty bold in their leadership in that area as well. So happy to help facilitate between some of these state procurement officers as well for guidance, and certainly Department of Labor Standards is also another avenue. So I think if you have questions, or you're envisioning really trying to be bold in spending in a particular area and you're not sure, please let any of us know, and we're happy to facilitate and see if we can get some additional guidance through the state agencies. With specific regard to police reform, I had one of my first conversations when I took office was trying to do an environmental kind of analysis of all the departments in Lunenburg, and really just trying to meet with the most department heads throughout Lunenburg to get a sense of what their needs are and what their vision is for the future. And it was day 3, I think, of me in office, and I had the chance to meet with Chief Gamble and Chief Martineau from Fitchburg together to really talk about what are the challenges and the unintended consequences that are coming out of the police reform bill. And they both, Chief Martineau at the time had been chair of the Central Mass Chiefs of Police Association, really talking about the challenges, once again, for rural communities who were kind of excluded or maybe disproportionately impacted by this legislation and the costs associated with it, with specific regards to auxiliary and reserve police officers and their training. It is intended to be phased in over a period of 3 years. The first fiscal year is coming to a close on June 30th this year, and it's expected all officers with the last names ending A through I should have completed that training by the end of June 30 of 2022, and then the next cohort, 23, and then 24 finally. So the largest, looks like your largest cohort of your existing and current officers is occurring this year. Fun to start right out of the gate and absorb the financial challenge. And to your point, I think you are seeing maybe an outsized impact with regards to the training costs. Chief Gamble estimated it looks like it's going to come in at about $15,500 for the current fiscal year in those training and associated costs with the police reform-based training. So $15,500, and he seemed to indicate that would, and looking at the list in your roster of reserve officers, it appears that will be your largest allocation for training dollars and kind of replacement over time, if you will, of those officers as they're getting trained. Over the next 2 years, you'll see a drop next year, and then an even more substantial drop next year. And that's assuming static, that roster stays static.
Assuming they stay.
I'm aware that, and this is a challenge across the Commonwealth for all rural communities, but it's actually true even at our state universities, from UMass to Fitchburg State. They're experiencing it where you provide the training, you provide the initial hire, you get them into the field, and the second they're trained, then they go off to another municipality that pays more. And it may be Fitchburg that takes from Lunenburg, and then Worcester takes from Fitchburg, and it creates that cascading effect. And so there are some discussions there about how we try to stop some of that cascading hires and kind of stealing from one municipality to then give it up to another municipality. So that said, it looks like all told you're going to be looking at in the ballpark of maybe $30,000 over that 3-year time frame for the training costs. Again, assuming a static force. I think the legislature is indeed aware of this as an unintended consequence. They've had discussions with members of leadership about this throughout the year. And recently I've spoken with a couple of my colleagues in central Massachusetts who also have rural municipalities, and they're experiencing similar, in some cases, in the case of Templeton, for example, they're really kind of a crisis of about $100,000 training deficit in some cases. Those organizations that are more reliant upon reserve and auxiliary than they are on full-time officers. So I think Lunenburg, over time, as you start to execute on that 10-year hiring plan, which I know you're kind of in the middle of that 10-year hiring plan of moving from more reliance on reserve to more reliance on full-time, hopefully that will ease some of the costs. That said, the rural legislators are indeed looking at, can we Can we look at a trust fund or something to help ease the transition for training costs? So those are conversations that are happening right now. Again, even earlier today, I had a conversation with Representative Zlotnick, who will represent Templeton, currently represents Gardner and Ashburnham, Winchendon, and Westminster, who are also seeing some of those similar costs. So having conversations there about what we can do. There's no imminent legislative fix there, but it's at least in the discussions, and we're aware that what you're experiencing there. Reporting requirements, I can't speak too in depth on specific kind of appetite for easing reporting requirements. I would suggest that, perhaps where your department heads and where your individual staff members, whether it's in policing or schools or procurement, health, any of these other specific areas, each department and each secretary and each commissioner have different reporting requirements, which I know is also part of the problem. There's no uniformity across the board, but each reporting requirement is specific to a different function and a different secretary typically. So I guess what I would ask for our benefit is, as your department heads are encountering some of these onerous reporting requirements, please communicate that to us, and we can send it to the secretary or to the administration, or even to chairs of appropriate committees, and ask, one of two questions. One, is this correct? Is it, are they interpreting this correctly? Are there additional resources? And then secondly, of how are other communities in kind of that same peer group and peer size? You don't have a municipal staff that's equivalent to those of cities and other metropolises. So how are other cities and towns coping with some of these requirements? And then lastly, I guess I would also say Mass Municipal Association sometimes has some working groups that are set up and tasked directly to really try to get at the heart of onerous reporting requirements and kind of eliminating bureaucracy that really gets in the way of municipal government acting as swiftly and decisively as it wants and needs to. With regards to document retention, as in my prior life as a city council president, I oversaw the city clerk's office in Fitchburg, and I know it was a significant cost to the city of Fitchburg as well, of record retention, physical record retention, and this will bleed into the next topic, which is, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on the new city hall to be able to house documents that go back from the founding of the town and then the city, and through present day, and there's off-site record retention and storage as well. And again, I can't speak to the specific needs. Every department has different needs, whether it's procurement and bidding, or inspection reports, or tax and assessor records. I know Mass Municipal Association, as of a couple of years ago, I had attended a conference and they were working on forming some recommendations and work groups. So I would encourage you to also maybe work with them and see where the biggest strains and challenges are, because every town has different challenges and pinpoints. I know in Fitchburg, inspectional services is a big one that's really hurting them in terms of how many documents they need to hold for inspectional services, and sometimes in towns it's assessor based. Or so I'd recommend that you communicate with them as well, because I believe they are also working to prepare ultimately some legislative fixes and recommendations for how particularly smaller towns, but how every municipality copes with these. I think the open meeting laws and open government acts of the past decade, it's been great for the public to be able to gain greater view and access to government and governmental records and document requests through FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, but it's also increased the burden on the local staff and the time that you spend there. So again, something we're hearing, but it would be helpful to hear from you what those specific recommendations would be on where those biggest pain points are, and working with some of those peer municipalities would really help us to know which direction you'd like to go in there. And then lastly, when it comes to investments in peer institutions, I know you specifically mentioned Fitchburg City Hall. I can assure you, much to the pain of my previous life of when I was a Fitchburg City Councilor, that was entirely a municipal investment. There was, with the exception of one $25,000 disability access grant for the ramp in front of City Hall, every dollar of that project was municipally bonded and will be paid for by the taxpayer with no other government grants, awards, or earmarks associated with the project. But to your point, that's not lost on me that, you're seeing a lot of historic preservation in Leominster and in Fitchburg of old schools, whether it's B.F. Brown, and I'm forgetting I guess it's not my job to know the name of the school in Leominster, but Carter, thank you. Yeah. You're seeing, some enhancement and some improvements there using historic tax credits and other types of state preservation funds. But often what you're seeing is where you're having the private sector come in or the nonprofit sector partner, and it's really so I would say what Fitchburg did to really be able to maximize these have been really one, zoning changes, particularly around housing and affordable and market rate housing to incentivize and encourage, but also coming up with compelling incentives to spur private investment and everything from the old Harper furniture store in downtown Fitchburg to the B.F. Brown School as well. And through those, the private sector can then leverage some public dollars in the form of historic tax credits. And so I found New View Community has been, probably the best organization and most knowledgeable about navigating the historic tax credit process and leveraging. It takes, it's a project that was, I think, started in the first year that I first took elected office in 2013, and haven't yet broken ground. So sometimes they do take up to a decade, and that can be the slow bureaucratic process of relying on those historic preservation funds. But I think coming up with that capital plan, using zoning reform and using zoning changes to help incentivize and create more conducive conditions helps. And then finally looking at, whether it's tax incentives or the public-private collaboration aspect often help with those, and that really does help start to unlock those dollars. Similar to what Senator Cronin mentioned earlier, I think you don't want us deciding and telling you what to do, what you want to do with these properties, and I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of room for growth with a number of these historic properties that you have in Lunenburg. It's not for us to tell you what to do with them, but we stand ready and willing to help and support you. And, once you've made that decision, and then trying to figure out what now to do with it and how to bring resources and how to bring further collaboration with private and nonprofit partners. And with that, I will turn this over to Representative Sina.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank the chair for the invitation, Peter, and other members of the committee who's here tonight, Evan, Thomas, and the vice chair, Chris, for the invitation. Also want to thank the town manager, Heather, for working so well with my office for the past year and a half since I was elected to represent the town of Lunenburg. And I will say you have a great town manager, because we hear the request, we hear the needs, and I'm very grateful to have the partnership with the town as well. And working together with our delegations, we were able to secure some funding for one of the schools here in Lunenburg to update their fire alarm system, which is not everything, but we need to get more. In regards to Chapter 70, it certainly, I think, was certainly a a need that I think the education formula needed to be updated. So I think it certainly is benefiting the state and children that are low income in low income areas. But certainly we can look at ways to modify or update the formula so that towns like Lunenburg are not receiving their fair share. So we want to make sure that that's not the case. In regards to the police reform bill, I was actually very, very proud to vote for that bill. We want to make sure that police officers are licensed and are, if they either violate some of those rights that everyone has, that we should be able to hold them accountable. But I certainly do understand that money is everything, but sometimes to run a local run government and small municipalities like here, the town of Lunenburg. But with that, I would certainly look for some discussions. I am in the education committee at the State House, and education is very important to me, and I certainly would look for areas that we can increase funding in education. It comes to healthcare as well. Certainly want to lower the cost for healthcare cost. And I know the town has to be creative in looking for ways to perhaps, I know it's a very sensitive topic when we talk about increasing property tax or looking for ways that we can support the education that our children are receiving, because we know that every dollar invested in education, we gain perhaps $5 or $6 more in the future when it comes to revenue with the state. So I will just take some questions. I don't want to take too much of your time. I just want to say thank you for the invitation to be here, and we'll love the questions because we want to be supportive, and that's why we're here tonight, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Senator Cronin's point was very well taken. We're not going to solve all or any of these problems here tonight, but I think that the most important thing is that you understand what's on our radar. What are the important topics to us that we're hearing, and the pressures that we're hearing from the department heads, and for that matter, from the citizens in Lunenburg who expect a level of service for the amount of taxes that they pay, not only to the town and property taxes, but also to the state of Massachusetts. And you know, speaking for myself only, not only do I pay a lot of money in property taxes in Lunenburg, but I also pay a lot of money in state income tax as well. And you know, I was a supporter of the Police Reform Act. I was a supporter of the Student Opportunity Act. I think I still am a supporter of both, by the way. But as I watch literally billions of dollars of my state income tax money go into these programs, and then I'm being asked to pay additionally from my property tax dollar to account for the funds that we're not getting, that we previously were, or the rates of increases that we previously were, I start to wonder what I voted for. And I want to emphasize the point that these formulas are extremely complex. So you talked about enrollment. If you look at our enrollment 10 years ago, we're up, right? We went through a steady increase over the course of the last decade because of the housing projects that went in on the western side of town over the course of the last decade. And we did see fairly steady increases in Chapter 70 over that period of time, pre-Student Opportunity Act. But as that development stopped, our enrollment has started to back off a little bit. But that's only one piece, right? It's only like 1/4 of the total formulaic piece of this. The other is that while our relative income and wealth, I think, per person in Lunenburg has actually dropped a little bit as a result of those developments, it still doesn't meet the threshold set to have a substantial impact in the Student Opportunity Act. Our kids are performing relatively well. But nevertheless, when you see a roughly 0.5% increase in Chapter 70, and your expenses are going up by 2.5% to 3.5% in your school department, where Chapter 70 was a substantial portion of that contribution, now we're paying more from the town budget, which, yes, our levy is capped by state law, which was enacted by the voters, not by the legislature. I did have the opportunity, Mrs. Novak, I know at least a couple of you watched the meeting, recommended that we read a study that was done on ability to fund the schools. And I can tell you that, it isn't explicitly stated in that document, but the reality is that DESE is also calculating and looking at towns that are going out and passing overrides, right? And that's fine for the towns that want to pass an override and invest substantially more in their local education. But in my mind, an override should be above and beyond, or an emergency situation where our local situation, costs, what have you, have exceeded our ability to fund. But an override that it needs to be put in place because the state is not funding to the level of expectation that it previously was, in my mind, is impossible to sell. Impossible. We won't be able to do that. And so what are we left with? We're left with funding closer and closer to that minimum level of funding in the schools, or we're left from pulling from other departments. Those are our two options. And we're not, the good news is that we're not in a bad situation right now, right? We were able to bridge some of those gaps because of other funding sources and other things that are going on in town. But, someday this COVID money is going to dry up. All this federal spending is going to dry up, and where are we going to be left? And my concern, I think the concern of some of the other members here is, what is our long-term, sustainability? And that's the primary concern. With that, I'll turn it over to the members of the committee. I'm sure that there's some additional comments.
Sure. Again, thank you for coming. Took a few notes. It might be a little random here. Quite simply, document retention. I just think you go electronic. You allow for electronic retention. I work as a federal defense contractor. I haven't printed a document in 2 years. And the federal government has as much, regulation as the state government. So to me, that's a simple solution. It actually opens transparency because now electronic documents are easier for the public to come by versus, traipsing into town hall and asking for FOIA requests and going into some dusty attic across the street to go grab some documents. So electronic retention is we're allowed to do microfiche. I think the times now is let's allow for electronic. Additionally, you start to think...
In lieu of physical retention.
In lieu of physical retention, yeah. I mean, I watched the select board meeting, and they have like these piles that they pass down for people to sign. It's crazy. And we look at things like Massachusetts wants to be a leader in carbon footprint reduction. And I'm just saying, look at all that carbon, going down and then look at all the heating to heat, to keep that carbon warm, so it can be, maybe dug out in however many years. I did have a question. You seem to say the decline in student enrollment across the board continued to happen. Is that just because of birth rates? Is that because, the children are going to private schools or other schools, or is it a combination?
Largely due to COVID these past 20 months, 24 months, you saw a lot of parents take their kids out of school, unenroll them, and re-enroll them in either homeschooling, in some cases in private schools. And in some cases, kids just are entering the school system a little bit later than they typically otherwise would. So that's accounting for that, 3 to 5% in some cases declines.
Okay. Another one, just to when we talked Chapter 70 and we had, the school committee chair, even beforehand talk about that. Let's not forget about Monty Tech and the others. We get almost nothing, I think, per student on the Chapter 70 sheet or whatever sheet it is for Monty Tech. So
we pay substantially more than any other participating community in Monty Tech right now per student.
Yeah, and just in general, I think, the trades and the vocation schools is a good thing for a lot of students. This push towards everyone going to college, and, a lot of kids really should be going into the trades, coming out of school with hefty debts and low salaries because, you kind of pursued a dream versus maybe what the trades would offer. That something else just to consider there. With respect to town buildings, I don't want you to decide either. However, when we're talking about coming up against our borrowing limits, it's hard to say, should we go forward with this project in hope that maybe the state comes along with some matching funds. Without some level of commitment there, that becomes a very difficult thing to do. And, I appreciate, $25,000 coming to the town, but, proportional to what we see, given to other communities, it's kind of a drop in the bucket, honestly. And then finally, lots of talk about the children in the schools and all that, but we can't forget our greatest generations and our seniors that honestly they're getting priced out of this town. They can't afford to live here. And I don't know what, whatever we're at, 7% inflation or whatever it is this year is going to do to them. The cost of heat housing, is through the roof this year. It's very difficult for fixed income, obviously. So, that's the other side of that equation. They've done a lot for us to get us to where we are. So we can't, every time you talk about the student, talk about the, the retired. So those are just my comments, I guess.
Evan, yeah.
Chris stole my thunder, so thank you for coming. My questions were basically summed up.
Mr. Baelish?
Just a couple comments. Again, thank you all for coming. It's really, I'm relatively new on the committee here, and so I'm still learning a lot. There's lots to learn. It's quite Byzantine at times to me, it seems to me, but very, very helpful to hear your thoughts. But I think one of the conclusions I come away with, or a couple conclusions from the discussion, is that, for Chapter 70 and then also for the police training requirements, that there's no changes that are in any way imminent. Am I correct in that?
Yes, right. And so I think one of the things that we want to be very candid with both your committee and the select board is where we can really shape things with an outlook towards the next 5 years, right? So the Student Opportunity Act is not going to be fully implemented until 5 years from now. And so people are going to be taking a look at the impacts of that policy over the next 5 years. But in terms of transformational change to the funding formula, or what it's going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now, in Lunenburg specifically, I think you can, with a fair degree of certainty, predict what it's going to look like. And I think a broader part of this discussion is, just having listened to Ms. Novik's presentation, we've got the $18 million base budget with 60% of Lunenburg contributing, approximately 40% of the state, and then Lunenburg contributes an additional $11 million. So in the big picture, if the state comes forward with another $1 million or another $2 million, which I'm not saying is going to happen with the funding formula as it is, the town is going to have to figure out a way to responsibly grow its tax base. And I think a part of the discussion with the other buildings in town has to be responsible economic growth. We talk a lot at the state level about how to grow revenues and how to do it progressively to make sure that seniors or our low-income residents aren't shouldering the burden. And, we talk about the millionaire's tax, and today I read in the paper, there's a new projection it's gonna raise $1.3 billion maybe. And we can debate about that, but that's not life-changing money. It's not life-changing money for Chapter 70, it's not life-changing money in the state for Chapter 90. And frankly, over the past quarter, the state's revenue has grown by more than that and exceeded projections by more than that. We do it by economic growth. We do it by having a strong economy in the Commonwealth, and I think a part of the discussion here in Lunenburg is how to responsibly maintain the character of the town as somebody who grew up here and lives here, but also increase the commercial tax base if we're serious about funding our schools at $11 million and beyond over base budget every year and into the future. That's something that the town is going to have to decide and take really seriously.
I think, to your point of, what is imminent, there's nothing imminent, and really it's a 5-year funding plan and also a 5-year study, essentially, a lifetime study. The 2007 Educational Act reforms were adopted, and then it took 12 years to get the Student Opportunity Act to then react to the changes that were made and adopted in 2007, to commission a study in 2015 that was put out, and then 3 to 4 years for legislation to react to that study and address, probably 80% of the concerns of that study with the Student Opportunity Act. So it doesn't happen quickly and it doesn't happen overnight, and so it's figuring out, what are maybe the small things we can do in the short term, but then really it's making sure that we're accurately capturing the pain points now so that we can address them in the long term.
I would respond to Chris' comments about the $25,000 being a drop in the bucket, and I would agree with that. But when we filed this amendment, we requested for the whole amount. And the legislative process, they will, okay, let's cut this in half, or let's give X, Y, and Z so much. So it's a political sphere. So being a freshman, what's the likelihood we're going to get the whole amount? So sometimes it's challenging. We have to work with an institution the way that it's designed to work. So certainly there's ways to improve it. I wish every member would receive an equal amount for their district. I think that would make it more fair, quite frankly. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. What I will say is that we have money for heating and to help people with heating assistance. And a lot of money was allocated. So, you have to qualify those guidelines financially to be eligible. But my office, we were able to refer, I want to say, many constituents to SMOC and other organizations to help them pay. And unemployment certainly became really one of the top things in my first year in the office. Was every email we're getting was unemployment based, and how do we support the people who are unemployed, who are either was laid off because of COVID. So part of the job that we do, we receive those constituent inquiries and we try to navigate through the system. We want to make sure that people who reach out to our office are heard and are being assisted through the services provided by the state. And sometimes some local organizations would help in and chip in. But we're here to listen to your request that what we can do in the next 5 or 10 years to upgrade the laws that are there, because many of these laws that we're talking about are laws that were being debated 20, 15, 10 years ago. So we are now in the position that we have to evaluate them, how it's going to benefit our district. And that's why we're here tonight. We want to make sure that the bills that are there, the laws that are in place, what needs to be updated, what needs to be changed. But my hope is that with the ARPA money, we may have a second ARPA bill. And if we do, my question to the committee, what is your priority in Lunenburg? I heard from the town, but since we're here with the finance committee, I want to hear what are your top priority, your top 2 things that you'd like to get it done. Because certainly we can keep that in mind when that time comes. And perhaps a supplemental budget. We have a budget coming up. We have allocated a lot of money for housing, transportation. And quite frankly, I hope that we can upgrade our public transportation system to make it more green. Certainly, we can do that. And we have, it sounds like we're going to have the means to do that. Certainly might not benefit Lunenburg as much, given we don't have a robust public transportation here in the town. But that's some of my goals, and I'm sure the delegation shares that as well. So I don't know if I can take this moment to ask, okay, what is your priority?
Let me, before we answer your question, I want to take a moment on a couple of things here. First of all, we do have a member that's participating remotely. We had two, we now have one.
Okay.
So I do want to check in with Jay Simeone. Jay, do you have any comments or questions? Jay, you're muted. You're still muted. There you go.
No, I don't have any questions, but thank you for coming. It's been very informative, a lot of good information.
Okay, thanks, Jay. So before we attempt to answer your question, Representative Sina, and I'm not sure that we're going to give you a good answer tonight, by the way, I did want to circle back on a couple of issues, just personally that caught my attention. On the police issue, this is more than the incremental costs of training. This is about how our police department is comprised and how we go about continuing to train the officers that are part of our cadre of officers. Today we have a mixture of full-time and reserve police officers. And those reserve, and the point that you made around that 10-year hiring plan, you're absolutely right. Like, we're in the middle of a plan to add a police officer every year. And by the way, that's a substantial investment, because not only are we training that officer, we're also paying their salary. We're also putting, for every couple of officers or 3 officers, we're putting a car on the road. We're paying benefits. Like, that all adds up, right? There are substantial burdens that come along with a full-time officer. It's great to be able to cover shifts with reserve officers. It's great to send reserve officers on details and that sort of thing. But if it becomes unsustainable as just a time commitment for those reserve officers, and or unsustainable just to be able to recycle and retrain reserve officers because we can't retain them, then we're going to have to hire more full-time officers. And so those additional 5 officers or 4 officers, whatever we're projecting going forward, I'm not sure exactly what year we're in, that could turn into another 10, very easily. So I just want to make sure that we're not limiting this discussion to a $15,000 or $30,000 incremental cost. There are ramifications of those costs that are potentially substantial if we come to a point where reserve officers are not an important element of our police force in Lunenburg, or we can't sustain that element of our police force in Lunenburg. And that's really my primary concern, and I apologize if I wasn't communicating that initially.
That's helpful. I think, what you're seeing particularly across the entire law enforcement profession right now is similar to what we're seeing across a lot of professions right now, which is retention is paramount to every organization. It's hard to recruit, even harder to retain. People are leaving the workforce in record numbers. People are moving into different sectors, and the worker has never commanded a better situation in terms of the open job market. And law enforcement is experiencing all of those, compounded with some of the ramifications of law enforcement over the past, police reform over the past 24 to 36 months. So what you're seeing right now is some really pressure points on how to get more people into the workforce, around training, that's around education. Fitchburg State has the first of its kind in the country program of doing a 4+1. Graduate, you get your bachelor's degree, and within that 4 years, you also get your policing certifications. So you go an extra 3 months during your summer as soon as you graduate, and you walk out essentially in 4 years and 3 months at no cost to the municipality. So that has kind of been a study over the past 5 years of see, does this model work? Are we graduating not only the professionals that we hope and aspire to see in the workforce, but does it help to reduce the cost in municipalities? And the initial results are yes, emphatically. And it's how do we emulate that across 27 public higher ed institutions throughout the Commonwealth? That's not a 1-year fix, it's not a 5-year fix, but we're talking about kind of the next generation of policing in the Commonwealth. And I do really think in the short term, it's helping North Central, and it's starting to really benefit North Central, that program at Fitchburg State. But if we can have 27 institutions graduating, 45, 50 professionals every year, well, that starts to go a long way towards meeting the gap in workforce that we're experiencing today. That'll help too on the retention side. So hopefully you don't have that revolving door at all times as well. So I think it is some of the market factors that you're seeing now that are exacerbating it, but your point is heard loud and clear, and it's being felt by other communities, and so certainly we're having those conversations. I'm not pledging a fix today. I know what the fix that I would like to see, but it takes 81 legislators to kind of reach that consensus to get a bill to the floor. So that's what we'll be working on across peer institutions.
In terms of top priorities, I'm inclined to make an agenda item for another meeting so that we have some time to think about this. I think that, many of the comments that you heard tonight are all very germane to the conversation, but there are big projects in Lunenburg that there are big issues in Lunenburg that we need to deal with. We talked about our municipal buildings and land use. Last week, and it's an agenda item for us here tonight, last week our select board recharged our municipal building committee, and that committee needs to look at how we're going to move forward, not only with the TC Passio's building, but potentially with other buildings, including this one and Ritter. As Mr. Menard alluded to, we can't just borrow to our heart's content, right? We need to borrow basically to a cap. We don't want to have, in fact, our town policy is we don't want to have debt service greater than 11% of our total levy, our total capped levy. And so we need to plan based on our borrowing capacity, the citizens' ability to pay for and to vote for, quite frankly, these projects that will inevitably come back around, right? We had some proposals fail. We need to go back to the drawing board. We need to go back to the drawing board essentially within a financial plan. But at no point today can we go into that financial plan and say, yeah, we're going to spend $1.5 million across the street at 30 School Street, but the state's definitely good for $500,000 of that. Why? Because we don't know that, right? That would be irresponsible to do that. Yeah, we know we need to spend $2 or $3 million to bring Town Hall up to speed, but we'll probably get some tax credits because we'll do some public-private partnership in the building. We'll turn it into an art gallery or something. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but we don't know that, right? There's no way to plan around that right now. So to whatever extent you can help us to paint that path, to build that roadmap, that would be extremely valuable to Lunenburg.
I will say that the Mass DOT has projects in place for the next 5 or 10 years that I don't know if Lunenburg has applied for any in terms of updating the roads or bridges here in town. Certainly there's a lot of money that can be used for that purpose. And we can certainly always do a lot of support with the town. To Mass DOT. So certainly there's ways.
And by the way, I expect that as just you doing your everyday job, right? Like, with all due respect.
Right. And
if we're applying for a grant and the town manager calls and says, I need some help getting this grant through, like, that's you doing your job. The question you asked of me is, what are our big priorities, for the next 5 or 10 years? I want you to keep doing your job and helping us get those grants, absolutely. But the big projects around here are going to be municipal building use and land use. And then the next thing that I begin to think about are, what are the things that government can get involved in that can really improve the quality of life of the residents of Lunenburg, right? One of the topics that has come up multiple times is utilities. not only electric utilities, which is a nightmare here in town, and our local monopoly supplier is horrible to work with, quite frankly. And
Unitil?
yes, and the Department of Public Utilities is worthless and unhelpful, quite frankly, and is largely sat by insiders in that industry. Why, I don't know, but that seems to be the case. Not only help there, but also in broadband. I'll just give you an example, right? So in Lunenburg, we have one cable TV provider, Comcast, Xfinity. That they are really effectively the only broadband provider in 3/4 of the town. Where I live, in most of Representative Kashmerik's district, we also have Verizon for broadband, not for television. And that allows for some level of choice and competition, theoretically. But there's very little choice and very poor service when it comes to broadband in Lunenburg. I inquired when Arpa first came out, because we're in the process, as it turns out, of trying to buy and it's a funded project, buy our streetlights from Unitil. And we could very well find ourselves in litigation because Unitil is being impossible to work with when it comes to that. But let me make my point. I called Comcast and I called Verizon about what can we do potentially to do what's being done in downtown Boston. So as they've added LED to the streetlights on Beacon Hill, they've also added 5G access points to those streetlights. What could we do? How can we partner with private industry on these kinds of projects? We're going to have ARPA money that at the time was very restricted into broadband projects. Do you think I can get a call back from either of those companies? Not even a call. Not even a return phone call. So in my mind, those big projects helping us navigate those big bureaucracies, both government and private, and perhaps bringing together, projects that include other municipalities, I think would be extremely helpful.
With regards to Unitil, we could spend a whole night on it.
We could spend a whole night on them.
The whole topic, so I won't belabor the points, but Senator Cronin and I have filed a bill with Rep. Sina's support as well. So we have a House and a Senate version of the bill. It's called the Muni Choice Bill for short. And it's a bill that may sound somewhat familiar. Rep. Dina Talley, my predecessor, 2 reps before me, had filed it and made some rather serious inroads during the Great Recession. Unfortunately, the bill hasn't been filed in about 5 or 6 years, so it's kind of starting it from scratch once again. But the long and short of it is, at present, if a town or a municipality was looking to build a sidewalk down your road, you'd use a process called eminent domain, right? And you talk to the landowner, you assess fair market value. The property owner couldn't say, no, you're not doing it. They would have the choice to say, I'm challenging the amount, but once the town has made the compelling argument that it is in the broader public interest, eminent domain occurs, and then you haggle over the price. In utilities, that process does not exist. There is no compelling public will to override the utility company's claim to that property. So right now, if Fitchburg and Lunenburg, Townsend came together and looked to form a municipal alliance and say we'd like to outright buy all of the infrastructure from Unitil, Unitil can, and they have already said that they would say no for any price. Because they know they can continue to make exorbitant profit at the expense of our residents and their ratepayers. So they have made it very clear, abundantly clear, the answer is no matter how much you offer and no matter how many times you offer. We have filed a bill that would essentially take away their veto power, and it would say once a fair market value has been determined between the state and federal government, the municipalities would then have the ability to enter into an authorization to buy outright their infrastructure and then turn it into a municipal energy. And so what we know is municipal energy companies are often cleaner, they're greener, and they're exponentially cheaper. We need to look no further than Sterling offers offers the cheapest rates, or the second cheapest rates in the entire Commonwealth, and top 3 in reliability in terms of customer service and repairs. So we know that it can be done. It can be done in north central Massachusetts. It's a matter of changing the legislation. It's not an easy battle. I'm not, we filed the legislation for the first time this year. A lot has changed in the utilities and energy since that bill was last filed. So, we're working with the chairs and with the sector to try to identify how can we make this more relevant to today. Wind and solar, all of these things weren't really prevalent in energy, and so we need to continue to change and evolve the legislation to make it more relevant today. And it's going to be building a broad-scale alliance across the Commonwealth of like-minded communities. But I do think an opportunity exists for us to at least have a say and control over our own destiny, and then it'll be up to the individual municipalities and their ratepayers to make that decision, if that's the decision they want to go in.
There also needs to be a mechanism to underwrite a project like that, right? So I'm very familiar with the legislation that was stuck in committee forever.
And Peter, in regards to the monopoly, I certainly agree. As a consumer, as a customer of either Verizon or Comcast, I want to see options. Because if I'm not happy with National Grid, I want to go to Unitil or vice versa. I think we have at least 2 for every household, and it's unacceptable when we only have one option and they have to stick with Comcast because Verizon doesn't provide files in that area or vice versa. I think that's wrong. In regards to, there was something that was mentioned, broadband. I do have a bill that would allow for broadband, free broadband services, internet and public housing, and I think that certainly makes sense given COVID. But certainly we should be able to regulate some of that cost too. And I hate to say this, but every winter, when we hope that the cost of heating would go down, it always increases, right? And it makes no sense. And I think we certainly should be able to regulate some of that more. That cost. But I do have to go. It's almost 8:30. So I don't know if there's any last comments from the committee.
The only other point I wanted to make relative to the Unitil issue is I completely agree with what you're doing, and I supported the bill way back when Kathy Clark locally became a big advocate of that, and put an awful lot of pressure on Beacon Hill to include her own run for office on that topic. There needs to be a financial mechanism for that as well, right? Some means by which, if the municipality is going to go down that path, that we can do it without simultaneously ruining our credit and bankrupting ourselves while we're doing it. So please don't forget that piece. It has to be feasible, not just legal. And I don't know if your bills account for that, but we would need that as well.
They'd have to be separate.
Yeah.
We do meet with Unitil quarterly, so if there's any complaints, anything, please send my way, because sometimes I have nothing to tell them because I look at my emails, I haven't received a single email complaint about Unitil. So hearing this is great. I know there's a lot of flaws there, but I wanted to report this to them during my meeting, so if you can just send that to us.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on with Unitil with respect to the streetlights thing that I think the town manager can probably keep you posted on.
Okay, certainly we can push for that.
Yeah.
So one other potential, landmine ahead of us here is 40B. And the addition of
bringing that up.
of 300 homes hitting us all at once, and the impacts on our schools, and infrastructure, police, everything. I think we need to take a look at 40B again, and how it applies to a town like Lunenburg.
And what is the percentage right now here?
We're just under the
We're just under
the threshold.
Under 10?
Yeah.
Like at around 9?
Above 9.
Above 9.
And this 300, that's not accounting for this 300, correct?
Correct.
This 300 will put you way over the 9.
Well,
Correct.
yeah, well,
Depending on assessment.
yeah.
But I mean, we are in a housing crisis, and we need to be creative, and we need to be supportive of public housing. And just one example, in that Devon's Crust in Ayer, 122 families just received eviction notice, a third of that, to start off, because the developer wants to redevelop and rent for more money. And now here I am trying to help 30 families navigate through the court system, we provide them with legal aid and see what they can do to delay.
Yeah.
And these are people who have been here for 30 years, or even their entire life in Ayer, and want us to stay in Ayer, and they can't. There's no other, they can't even rent another place in Ayer. So, I know
It's got to be intelligent. It can't, right now, that 40B project makes no sense.
So just to characterize what's happening here, we've got a very rural road that gets very little traffic out in a very distant corner of the town. It has, properties all around it that are multiple acre properties, and we're going to stick, 3 or 4 garden-style apartment buildings on a lot. They don't fit in the area, but there's also no infrastructure up there to support it at all. And the expectation is that the town runs the infrastructure up to that area. There's invariably going to be litigation on this issue. It's going to go on for a long time. But it's important to put this in the context of not only is this going to require us to expand our services to be able to support this if it happens, and expand the infrastructure to support it if we're compelled to do so by the courts or by the state housing authority, but also we're a town that has just done a couple of large 40Bs. We're a town that just put in a large apartment complex, a very large apartment complex, that is all rental units that doesn't qualify for 40B. If you counted all of the rental apartments at Emerald Place, but we would be above that 10% threshold. But because of the funding mechanism and the process that happened for that particular complex, it's not 40B qualified. Right? So if you look at actual affordable units by the theoretical definition of a rental unit, we would qualify, but because of the way that project was done, it was originally supposed to be a mixed-use, commercial, residential. The developers changed it 6 times over the course of the project, and next thing you know, it's, and they were all supposed to be privately owned. They're not. We now have a project that doesn't qualify. So there's a lot of language in 40B that if it were tweaked a little bit, or there were requirements put on developers that said, no, a town is not compelled to expand infrastructure to meet your needs. You need to put your development in an area that the infrastructure theoretically supports it. I don't think anybody here opposes affordable housing, right? I'm a huge supporter of affordable housing. I sat on the ZBA in Lunenburg when we passed our first 40B. That one ultimately wasn't built either. We've had a number of these projects come around. But we need help, I think, when it comes to the language on these to make sure that these developers aren't running roughshod on our town, which is kind of where we're at right now.
Well, thank you so much for the time, and we'll certainly be in communication if you would like us to come back here.
And we really, once again, I really want to extend my sincere appreciation, your willingness to work with us, reschedule for this evening. Really appreciate it. We'll be in touch. I certainly think that I know that you have a very good partnership with our professional leadership in Lunenburg. I want to see us have a better partnership with the volunteer boards like the Finance Committee and our legislative delegation. I think there's opportunity to build dialogue and ultimately come to better solutions for Lunenburg. So thank you very much, and we'll be in touch to formally answer your question.
Thank you. And I'm going to give you guys my contact information. I know this is our first time here in person.
I'll echo those same sentiments. Your town manager, Heather Lemieux, has been fantastic to work with, communicative. Whenever there's questions about how legislation could impact Lunenburg, she's always the first to call and likewise the first to answer when we have questions about priorities and funding and resources. So just want to commend your town leadership, whether it's in the schools, the police, or the central office. They've been tremendous to work with.
Ditto, and thanks for having us tonight. I enjoyed the conversation and dialogue and look forward to continuing.
Great. Thank you. And I think this gives a good opportunity for the public to kind of, open meeting wise, see the interaction between the town government and the state government, which isn't always the case. So I appreciate your time as well.
And please come back.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Next on our agenda is Town Manager, Finance Director report.
everyone again. So, let's see, since we last discussed
December 9th.
December 9th. Wow. I don't think my reports go back that far. So the Ritter and Town Building envelope projects, those are moving forward. We discussed those at one of the select board meetings, doing alternate for some components that will ultimately have to go before the APDC. So those, the architect is working on those bid specifications, and hopefully we'll be putting those out to bid soon. The public, sorry?
Has 30 School Street gone before the APDC yet?
The submission has been submitted to them.
Okay, because it was on their agenda for a recent meeting, but the meeting was not televised or recorded. And I'm
Yes.
curious if you know if there's been any.
We have had no correspondence back from them.
Okay.
They indicated on Facebook
Which is the source of all,
The source.
of all things true.
that they were thinking that they would just reject it because there was no plan associated what to do with it. Is that a true statement?
That hasn't been communicated to us
Okay. Thank you.
formally. So that's first I've heard of it. Thank you. The public safety building chiller project, that we received bids for that, and they came in below our project costs. So that will be awarded and moving forward. The electrical work downstairs in this basement, the first phase, I would say, of that project has been done. That contractor did a great job cleaning up that area, took out, I think he said, 200 pounds of old wiring. So the next phase will be to look at all the live wiring, and that's going to be a lot of troubleshooting of where that all goes and removing that. The 30 School Street landscape design project, they had the first community meeting. And the survey, those results all came in. So we got about 36 responses to that survey. And based on that, the architect is coming back on this coming Tuesday. That's the second community meeting. And we'll present 2 conceptual ideas for that project. And
That's next Tuesday?
next Tuesday.
And is that in lieu of a select board meeting, or how's that?
It's like a workshop part of their meeting, so it will be a bulk of their meeting.
Okay.
So starting at 7 p.m. So if anyone wants to attend, both in person and via Zoom, they can attend. Let's see, we'll be putting out to bid actually our cleaning services as well, our cleaning company. They cannot perform due to labor shortages, meet the scope of work for cleaning our buildings. So we'll be putting that out to bid again. And ARPA funding, we did utilize a small amount towards rapid test kits. I don't know if you saw that. So about 130 test kits were allotted for seniors. The first 100 went within a day, and I'm sure these next 30 that we had available will go very quickly as well.
Are we buying more?
Right now, that there's no plan. That was, I contacted about 8 different vendors through the state contract that was available to us. Heard back from 2. One, the lead time was 4 to 8 weeks, and the other had test kits available for a case, and which is a limited amount, which we jumped on and got those at the beginning of this week. So we're hoping this would just get us through this spike period, and at this point, I'm not sure when we would be able to get the next.
And insurance is supposed to cover 8 per person on.
Going forward through the, yeah.
Coming soon, I mean, maybe.
Right.
Yeah. Wait till you see our insurance rates next year.
Yes, yeah.
Just the other pocket.
Also on Arpa Fund, I mentioned we've engaged Capital Strategic Solutions. Now we'll have an internal department head meeting to review possible projects proposed for consideration by department heads, but then we're going to have a presentation by them to the select board, which the finance committee can attend as well. Just an overview and discussion about possibilities, and then further community outreach meeting at a later date. So they'll be formulating some surveys as well, but it will be a good starting point to do an overview of what's eligible for projects.
When is that presentation of the select board?
The February 1st meeting
Feb 1.
at 7:30.
We should,
And our legislators are coming to that meeting at 7 o'clock, so we'll dovetail right into that
Okay.
discussion.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do any folks here think they'll attend that meeting?
Are you doing it in the Mideast?
No.
Okay, probably won't.
My reason for asking is, should we post for that or not?
If I'm traveling, I won't attend.
No, I know you won't.
Yep.
Thoughts?
Is that a Tuesday?
Tuesday, the 1st of February.
Doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah, I think we'll post.
Okay.
And if we don't have a quorum, we don't call it to order. It's as simple as that.
All right, great. The annual town meeting warrant is now open, and that closes on March 21st at 4 p.m. So anyone who wants to submit articles has until then. The Capital Planning Committee did finalize their prioritization of projects, and I will be presenting the first presentation on Tuesday, the capital plan, because it goes from the Capital Planning Committee with their recommendation and then to the town manager, where there's, the town manager has the ability to reprioritize or add projects to the list.
So that will be presented this coming Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay, and then you're going to present that as part of your overall budget presentation in February? Because we don't have a separate capital plan on the schedule.
No, I was going to present to, it will be a re-presentation of that at the January 27th meeting with the financial forecast
Okay.
as well. And my preliminary budget presentation is mid-February.
All right, hang on just a second. I just want to make sure I get this stuff right.
Would it be possible to get that sent to us, well, like even now or after, at least after Tuesday?
Yes, after, yeah. If I have a, it's when it goes to the select board, I can send it to you.
Yeah, so I'm sure you heard my comment. Information relating to the capital plan is not readily accessible anywhere online.
Yes, and not knowing that the minutes weren't posted, because they should be, I emailed the chair and
Which,
the...
by the way, is a whole other set of issues, which is try to find minutes for any board or committee on our website right now. Much easier said than done. But what I'm interested in, and I emailed you about, is that priority list, the costs associated with it, and where do we think that line is going to be relative to funding. And I know that I don't know if you have a final number, but I'm sure you've got some preliminary forecasting, formula-driven forecast for that.
Yeah. So stay tuned on that.
Okay, fair enough. So we will talk about that on the 27th.
Yes. I attended a meeting that Lori Trahan's office put together about the federal funding through ARPA. It was kind of, high-level discussion, really, about what's coming down the pike, which sounds like it will be a while, but, the really federal focus is on economic development, climate resiliency, and equity. There will be a lot of federal funds for culverts, bridges, and roads, and so that's part of the funding plan through the infrastructure bill. A Safe Streets program that helps with intersections, and a rural transportation program. So they didn't go into a lot of that, but we'll be seeing more information on that.
Do we have a list of, shovel-ready projects related to infrastructure? Are they all in the capital plan, or is there, if that money were to become available, how quickly could we kind of tie those two together?
Road projects you're talking
I
about?
think, yeah, didn't you say road and culvert and,
Yes, so obviously the Flat Hill Road culvert project, I guess you'd say is our only ready-to-go project at this moment. We have design work in play for the Page Street culvert, so that's in process. Trying to think if there's...
you don't have to answer now, I guess, but I was just wondering, I remember right around the time I came on to the board, I think shortly thereafter, you had given us a report of all the bridges and culverts and everything else and the age and the last repair of some of those. And it just seems like if this money is about to come ready, if we could start looking down that list and, it seemed like some of them haven't been touched in 99 years or something.
Right.
So
a big component of that is design work, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's funding that we would have to invest in, whether it's an eligible expense to determine that. So,
And just one other question related in a similar vein. At the end of Reservoir Street, I know they did a lot of work near Keating there, removing the trees. Are they planning to remove soil in that
I know
area?
they were
It
cleaning.
improved it a lot, but
Yeah.
it's not quite there from a...
The planning board is knee-deep in that still.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that was in the... Because it's actually going on.
Yeah, planning board, I
Brush
think, approved everything for the Lunenburg Central project for
That's
the
done?
site plan review. So, and the select board will be signing off on that easement on Tuesday as well. So, I know there was substantial cleaning of the roadside of that. And
Yeah.
so I don't know if it's fully complete, what stage it's at. I can find out.
Because it was great progress. I just think there's a little bit more that, even if the town had to do at that area, it seems to me one of our still most dangerous intersections in town.
But that was part of the conditions, that the planning board put
Okay.
on that project.
Is that it?
I think that's it.
So just so that the committee is aware, the town manager suggested, and I don't recall if we did this in previous years, but we will have a regular town meeting warrant and related updates here for foreseeable future. We'll talk at the end of the meeting about future meetings. You folks have a copy of the calendar that came in email. So if, anything, we will have an opportunity at every meeting to talk about just town meeting logistics. That being said, I did have a question on town caucus. Has that been scheduled yet?
No date has been set for that.
Okay. That's all I got.
Ask the Facebook gods.
Yes, I'm sure they'll know. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Municipal Building Design Committee charge, possible vote on appointment, reappointment. So, I forwarded you, I believe, all a copy of the new charge from the Select Board for the Municipal Building Design Committee, which is, I got to get used to saying that now. I had a brief conversation with Mr. Passios, who is no longer on the call tonight, about the board, about his thoughts moving forward with the board, and about where we are as a finance committee with respect to how we should be inputting into this design committee. And I don't want to belabor my position in terms of what I think we should be doing in terms of the budget piece of this and the planning of it. I outlined some of that to the legislators tonight. Mr. Passios asked that he would like to go to the next meeting of that committee, which when I spoke to him yesterday or the day before hadn't been scheduled yet. but it's anticipated that it will occur prior to our next meeting in 2 weeks from now. But at that point, I do want to have a substantive discussion about both how the financial picture fits into that roadmap that we've been talking about, the role of the Finance Committee and the role of that representative to articulate our findings and or facilitate our partnership in determining the financial piece of that roadmap. And then ultimately to either vote to appoint or reappoint for that position. I think that we're at a inflection point with this project where I don't think that just saying, yeah, Dave should continue to be the rep, given the change in charge is appropriate. I think we need to formally revisit that in the very near future. I had hoped to do so tonight, but I do want to say that the next meeting I view it as a deadline. Like, we need to make an affirmative decision on that at our next meeting. Any thoughts or discussion on that at this point, since it is on the agenda?
Well, one thought I have, and because I may not be at the next meeting, I think the work that was done at the very last minute, mostly by you, to come up with a lot of the analysis, was work that we should have been doing all along. And I think even back about a year and a half ago, we had a meeting on what we thought the Finance Committee should be doing with respect to that project. I don't know if the members at the time remember that. A lot are no longer here. And I still stand by that. I think we have, as a committee, a very big role in something that size. And I think beyond a committee member's input into what goes on during that meeting, I think the Finance Committee representative has a very large role to make sure that what this board, tying together that committee in this committee. And I think that that's certainly proven itself true based upon, I think, what happened this year at town meeting. And I like the fact that this is a more holistic plan. I think we need to get to a holistic plan, even if some of the budgetary items are just bogeys at this point. At least we understand what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years of financing and how this project would relate to it. And then additionally, if there's other sources of funding that may come about for any of those projects, working with town manager and the grant writers and grant knowledgeable people to say, hey, if this building here is going to be X million dollars, perhaps 20% of that, meaning town hall, 20% of that might be something we could get grants for. And we're not pursuing it yet, but at least we have it in the back of our mind that there's other potential sources on that. And we put that 10-year view of the budget together, fed into this process so that they have an idea of what at least this board thinks is feasible from a financial standpoint. So that's what I would say, is that whoever we choose for our representative should have that in their mind, that they're able to do that, they're willing to do that, they have the time to kind of dedicate to it. So my thoughts.
I fully concur.
Yeah, I do too.
Same.
Okay.
Jay's unmuted.
All right, let's move
Do you
on.
have something?
Jay, anything?
Yes.
Jay, did you have a comment?
I'm okay with Dave going to the meeting. I guess I was trying to understand what it is, how we're being represented.
Well, I mean, I think that that's for us to determine, right? To Dave's point, and we had a conversation that will mostly remain private, but to Dave's point was, his feeling was largely that he did not receive a lot of direct guidance from the Finance Committee over the course of the last couple of years. And I think that that's a fair point, by the way. We formed a subcommittee for a little while, and we looked at debt, and then we went back and we asked the financial consultants to get involved and that sort of thing. But we never made a finding. We never said, this is our position, you guys should, you guys should formulate around this. Let's face it, a lot went wrong in the last 2 years with respect to this building project, right? Like, the committee as a whole, I think, did great work, as I've said publicly, but ultimately, we didn't bring it over the goal line for a lot of reasons. And so, what I'm thinking in just my role as chairman is trying to formulate this in a way that we can hopefully get to a higher probability of success in one way or another, right? And I think that clearly, my chief objection to where we were at a few months ago was it wasn't within the envelope of a sustainable financial picture. So I think that it's now incumbent upon us to be able to help define what that sustainable financial picture is and work with the committee to determine how to fit all those pieces together. And I think that the role of our appointed member on that committee needs to be, first and foremost, to communicate that and help to communicate that, but to a certain degree also facilitate that. Perhaps beyond what is capable from just a chairman to chairman in the capacity that myself and Mr. Roy worked previously.
And then just to the charge, one question the number 5 is, I don't understand. The representations, members shall get approval of the committee prior to making statements, presentations, or joining activities on behalf of the committee. But I think the very role that we would fill with a representative in there would kind of somewhat violate that. So I don't quite understand that the reason that number 5 is
so
there.
my read of that language was a little bit different. So I think that every member of a committee is going to go back to their appointing committee to communicate whatever happened, and I don't think that there's the expectation that the chairman would do that for every committee, right? Like that's why we're appointing a member. But I don't think that it is the role of, just like we have on the Finance Committee, right? Like the chairman's job is to speak on behalf of the committee when the committee is not formed in session. So I think that my interpretation was it's essentially to do that, right? And preclude anybody from speaking on behalf of the committee. And I don't think that our interaction with them would violate that, but perhaps it would. I haven't thought seriously about it.
I've never seen that in any of our charges, so
yeah, well,
nor did I think I saw any time over the last 2 years where that came into play. So
for example, the select board actually has a written policy around the role of the chairperson as a spokesperson for that committee, as does the school committee. We've never done that, although we could have done it when we did our document last year. We just didn't add to that. And I think that my interpretation is that sort of directive in that same way. But again, I may have misread it.
Okay. Maybe just seeking clarification.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question to ask of the select board.
Why it's there.
Is there a timeline in this charge? I'm trying to read.
Good question. Not in my read.
Okay.
And back to speaking on behalf of the committee, I think that there are a number of members of the committee that have at least expressed to me privately what their own timelines are, and none of them have matched. So the truth is I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah, because it's a pretty comprehensive charge, right? And I'm just, I guess, to be more candid or more direct, I mean, it's not expected to be done in the next 2 or 3 months, right? I mean,
I don't think it can be.
Time for
I don't think it can be. I mean,
it's just not possible.
So one of the, one discussion that I had with a member of that committee was, it doesn't really matter until we get funding for architectural services. And in my mind, and in my mind, that's absolutely not the case. That's not correct. I think that The work that actually happens over the course of the next 4 to however many months, because it might not be ready for a proposal at town meeting, is really putting together a framework to figure out what are going to be the operating rules for determining that roadmap, right? You know, are we going to just suppose that we're going to go down the same path and put a building someplace that's perhaps smaller with less of a scope than the existing building, and then just fill in all the spaces that are vacated later on? Are we going to work backwards and start with these buildings and then find our way in that direction? Do we want to look at state funding first and potential funding sources? I mean, you know, there are a lot of different potential paths that the framework of this committee could follow to get to that charge. And I think that it's going to require a lot of conversation and multiple meetings just to figure that out. So, and that's before you get to, yeah, we need X $100,000 to do a design for anything. You know, I don't think, personally, I would not recommend the town meeting support another design article for X $100,000 with at least some sort of framework or roadmap in terms of, you know, I use the term at town meeting, plan of record, somewhat facetiously because I think it was misused previously, but I think we kind of need that, right? We need that sort of framework or roadmap to say we're building that plan of record so that people can begin to think about, okay, I'm going to approve or vote to approve this project because I understand the broader vision.
Right. Completely agree.
I mean, the warrant article closes, when did you say, in 2 months?
Yeah, it's just not feasible, right?
Okay.
Okay. Minutes. One of my favorite topics. So, there are 4 sets of minutes in the shared file. Those minutes are for October 28th, November 4th, November 16th, and December 9th. And I would accept any comments or motions.
I've read them all and agree with them. Does everyone else?
I have not read them, so.
I read them.
You have read them, Jay?
Yes, I read them all. I'm okay with them.
Okay.
I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Waters to approve all 4 sets of minutes, seconded by Mr. Menard. Is there any discussion? This will be a roll call vote. Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Baelish.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. Mr. Passios and Mr. Gray are not present. Please let the minutes reflect that, and we're almost caught up on minutes, I think. By the way, I did get an accounting from the town clerk's office. We do have 4 very old sets of minutes that we're delinquent on, and I will pass those on to Amanda, and we will sooner or later catch up on them.
Did we do the minutes before the special town meeting?
That was you just passed that.
Okay.
Yep. That was the November 16th.
November 16th, that's right. Okay.
Yep. Okay, committee reports. Any committee reports?
Dave's not here.
Dave's not here. It's going to be a very quiet. Okay, I have watched at least a couple of school committee meetings since our last meeting. There have been a number of additional small funds transfers within departments. The primary school did a transfer of funds for supplies at the last meeting, you know, to address some, I think, lines that were underfunded in the budget that, due to unspent funds, they're able to take care of, and I think that it was pretty minor. They did receive permission to post a couple of administrative positions. One was a vacancy and one was a short-term, I believe, COVID-related impact, short-term appointments. They approved to post the bid for the busing contract. which did generate some discussion around the clause that would affect a issue like what occurred in 2020 where we didn't roll the buses for several months. And the town ultimately contributed, I think, 50% of the cost of the undelivered services, so to speak. And they put in language to the effect that basically the onus is on the contractor to request some sort of contribution from the town were that to occur again. I had a follow-up discussion today with the superintendent and Mr. Cassidy on that. I actually think that at some point they're going to want to stipulate whatever that number is and make that part of a contractual obligation rather than waiting for the legislature or the select board to get involved, as what happened last time. But that will be still subject to the negotiation and or the bids that are received. And then finally, one of the members of the school committee, and this is just an interesting data point that I think everybody should be aware of. We've heard multiple presentations from the superintendent over my tenure here about, behavioral and emotional support in the school department and all the additional resources that are required. And one member attended a school advisory committee meeting last week at the middle school, and they received a report from the guidance counselors and social worker in the middle school. And the report indicated that pre-COVID, the average number of mental health referrals that went through their office in the middle school was 1 to 2 per school year that, required some sort of outside intervention and follow-up related to the mental health of a student. And right now they're running a rate of 1 to 2 every week in the middle school. So, this is a systemic problem. This is a societal problem that we're going through right now. But these are like really, really serious issues. And by the way, these aren't repeat customers. These are unique referrals that are happening. So these are very real needs and extremely consequential topics that they're dealing with over there. And I'm just glad that we have people in place to deal with it, for the time being anyway. But it really surprised me I guess it didn't surprise me, it jarred me to hear that.
Wow.
And that's it for my school committee report. Any other committee reports? Hearing none. Is there any public comment? We got all the regulars here. All right. I'm not hearing any public comment. Items for future meetings. Oh, wait a minute. You knew it was coming.
Do we have the chair of the pepper?
Mr. Rogers, can you hear me? Mr. Rogers.
Yes, I can, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I wanted to comment on the school bus issue. I brought it up in public discussion and asked them to consider making sure that they have language that would not pay for something that we're not getting.
Okay.
There's reverberation on this connection.
I apologize. I'm not quite sure what to do about it, Mr. Rogers, but I can hear everything that you're saying.
Okay, that's fine. So the concern I have is that, first of all, we address the potential issue and be prepared to do something about it. And to sit, my opinion, to sit back now and say, well, we're only going to give 25 or 50 or 75% is crazy. Absolutely crazy, because I think My own personal thought is, we did it once, shame on us, yeah, we're not gonna do it again, you know? So, but that's my own personal view relative to that. Okay? And I'm sure that the school committee will sort that stuff out. The other thing is, I listened to the legislative delegation tonight, and they certainly are well-intended and good people and working hard. The thing that struck my hot button is that there is no way that we, as a community, can adequately address all of the issues that we have facing us, from the state and local and all kinds of things. So the bottom line is this. I think we have to, and this is, you know, for the Finance Committee as well, to prioritize what it is we can reasonably expect to tackle and to bring it to fruition, because there's so much going on. I don't see that there's anything, you know, if we will be chasing our tail, is what I think. So, I think there's just not enough hours in the day, and you know, I think that the frustration level will escalate exponentially. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Good to hear from you.
Nice to hear from you as well. And thank you, committee members, for all that you do, because it ain't easy. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
The pay makes it worth it.
Okay, assuming no other public comment, items for future meetings. So I actually kind of put these in reverse, but let me do next meetings, and then I want to just survey the board about items for future meetings. So our next meeting is going to be January 27th here. At that meeting, the town manager will present her 5-year forecast, and she will also report on the capital plan. Our next normal meeting in sequence would be February 10th. However, the town manager is planning to present her budget and have it ready on her originally proposed schedule on February 17th. So what I have proposed to her, and I'm hoping the committee will agree with me, is that we forgo our meeting on the 10th and meet out of sequence on the 17th, and then we'll meet again on the 24th, where we'll start jumping into department level presentations. And oh, by the way, we'll be relatively weekly after that anyway. We'll be in our budget season for real. So I just wanted to run that by the committee and make sure that that's all copacetic with you guys about not doing the 10th, but doing the 17th instead.
That works.
Okay, good. In terms of items for future meetings, I may put an agenda item to and ask people to think about a formal reply to Representative Sina's request. I think that might be an interesting exercise, and perhaps to survey some of the professional management in town about how we should do that, and maybe have a conversation about that at a future meeting. The other thing that I've been neglectful in getting together is I do want to get the Green Committee in here at some point, and maybe that's a matter of figuring that into the budget cycle at this point. But we're overdue in catching up with them on all things streetlights. So that was all I had, but I wanted to survey the board to see if there's anything else that I might be missing for future meetings that might not already be sitting on a schedule.
So can I ask, what are the means that we communicate with our representatives typically? Do we do that through letters, memos, emails? Is it just verbal? And should there be, I think what you're suggesting, Peter, is, you know, a kind of an agreed upon priority list of things, whether it's from the Finance Committee or a broader group?
Yeah, I think, so first and foremost, we're an advisory board, right? I mean, our charge is to advise town meeting, and, to whatever extent we can, we happen to be, amongst the most informed in town when it comes to the fiscal issues, beyond the town manager and finance director and department heads. And so, I think a part of that charge is to also advocate for the town, both as individuals and as a committee. And I think tonight we did both. We all spoke our individual positions, but we also spoke reflecting our experience, our combined experience as a committee. That has not happened in my tenure on this board. This is the first time we've done this, and I've been here for pushing on 3 years. I'm sure it happened previous to that. Maybe Jay, I don't know, Jay, has this happened in your tenure?
I don't remember offhand.
Yeah, so it's been a while.
Yeah.
At a minimum, I'd like to see this be an annual thing, and I think that they will be amenable to that. I didn't specifically put them on the spot, but, that's something we could certainly take offline and do that. But, I think that there are also opportunities for communications that we can discuss in this board. By the way, we've done that on an ad hoc basis in the past, where Dave has reached out or I've reached out and had individual communication with a legislator and then reported it back to the committee. And that can, I wrote to them this week and copied you all on that letter. And that can continue. But I think that the onus is on us to determine when we want to communicate as a board. And we're all free, of course, to communicate as we see fit individually at any time. So, my thinking is, I don't want to say we're going to communicate with them every quarter, every 6 months or whatever, but when we get a request, as we got tonight, I think that's something that we can choose to respond to, and I think it's prudent to do so. And I think that there'll be other opportunities that'll come around that say, hey, case in point, the building committee issue, I kind of outlined my stance in terms of how I think that they can get involved in that process. But, the building committee and or the representative to the building committee and or the finance committee as a whole may see a need to reach out to them and say, hey, we need some help here, right? Like, can your office kind of help us to navigate some of these various potential funding sources? Can we, not necessarily a legislative earmark, but can we earmark with some of these various sources to say, let's get in line a year or two down the road around various projects, that kind of thing. I think that they have resources available to them that we don't.
Yeah. I guess as I think about it, it's, how do we get the maximum leverage for the town,
Yep.
right? And is that from us? Is that, I don't know, maybe this is a question for the town manager, like how have we coordinated these communications in the past, or have we, is it kind of more ad hoc, or does it make sense to have a more formal agenda that we want them to pay attention to? And maybe that's a way to get the most leverage.
I should also add, Tom, that the town manager, and she can speak to this certainly, does communicate, I'm sure, very regularly with each of them, but they also make requests of the town on an annual basis around, as they have, and she reported tonight, around like earmark priorities. But there are also opportunities that come around on a fairly regular basis, like the bond bill. Oh, I forgot to ask about the bond bill tonight. I'm sorry. Oh, it just jumped in my head, like, bond bill. Like the bond bill where, we have the opportunity to say, okay, there's going to be some money available, what do we want them to advocate for? Some of that's on an annual basis, some of it's ad hoc, and the town manager does so in communication with the finance committee, and usually the select board actually kind of approves those priorities and reorganizes those priorities. What we don't do, and I think we should, is we have not been invited to, nor have we inserted ourselves in those conversations with the select board, right? And, I'll take the hit for that this year around, but I think that that's something that we should, again, in our advocacy role, I think that, we should be proactive in at least communicating an opinion, if we have one, to the select board when they get in that business of prioritization.
Right.
I think it's very appropriate for this board to meet with the legislative representatives, because we're the only legislative committee in town. And our job is to report out to town meeting, in essence, as almost a subcommittee would be in Congress or the Senate or something like that. So I think it's very, and again, towards some level of proactiveness, as some of these reform bills come up or the opportunity bills come up, I think it's our duty also to say, hey, these are the ramifications or, your unintended consequences. We heard a lot today, but, we should be publicly pointing those out, legislators to legislators. So I think it's appropriate, and I think, the select board comes at it from potentially a different angle, more from the executive, function, but I think it was a good discussion, and I think the three of them are open to having the discussion, and I think it should be a discussion in levels of, some level even pushback one way or another, that we're really advocating for what this town needs, because that's what we are supposed to do.
Yep, totally agree.
That, the finance committee was invited to the first meeting, which was the delegation to discuss the budget prior.
Yep.
And we'll be there, or at least I will.
Yeah, be informed of the timeline.
We're there for just an attendance, correct? It's not a joint meeting, right?
Well, we're going to post.
We are.
Yeah, just, and we, if we're going to have a quorum there, we need to post anyway. We haven't been invited for a joint meeting, but we can post, and I'm not shy, so.
Crash the party.
All right. Anything else? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mrs. Archibald has a hand up, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Mrs. Archambault, did you have a comment?
I'm trying to unmute here. No, I didn't have my hand up,
Oh, okay, all right, good.
but thank you anyways.
Oh, I'm seeing somebody's hand.
Okay, I'm not, so I'm not sure why.
Must be me then.
No worries, no worries. All right, with that, don't mute Jay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, motion to adjourn made by Mr. Waters, seconded by Mr. Menard. This is a roll call vote. Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
Mr. Baelish.
Aye.
Mr. Waters.
Aye.
Mr. Menard.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. We are adjourned at 9:26. Have a good night, everybody, and see you
Have a
on
good night.
January 27th.
Okay.
Thanks, Jay.
Have a good night.
Yeah, 8 for 6, perfect.
Okay.
That was Monday through Saturday.